The whisper of scandal followed Margaret Keller through the dusty streets of Mojave, California, like tumbleweeds chasing the wind on that scorching afternoon in July 1882. And she held her head high despite feeling every disapproving stare burning into her back. She walked with purpose toward the general store, her worn boots kicking up small clouds of dust with each step. The sun beat down mercilessly on the small desert town, but the cold shoulders she received from the townspeople felt far more brutal than any heat wave. Margaret had arrived in Mojave 6 months ago, a divorced woman with nothing but a battered trunk and enough money to rent a small room above the telegraph office. At 24 years old, she had already been married and divorced, a scarlet letter that might as well have been branded on her forehead for all the good it did her reputation. The women clutched their skirts closer when she passed, as though her mere presence might contaminate their virtue. The men either leered at her with assumptions about her character or looked away entirely, not wanting to be associated with a fallen woman. She pushed open the door to Henderson's general store, the bell jingling overhead. The conversation between Mrs. Patterson and Mrs. Wolfe stopped abruptly, both women turning to stare at her with tight expressions of disapproval. "Good afternoon, ladies," Margaret said politely, her voice steady despite the knot in her stomach. Mrs. Patterson sniffed, turning her considerable bulk away. "Some people have no shame, showing their faces in decent establishments." Margaret's cheeks burned, but she moved past them toward the counter where Mr. Henderson stood looking uncomfortable. "I need flour, sugar, and coffee, please," she said quietly. Mr. Henderson nodded, avoiding eye contact as he gathered her items. Behind her, she could hear the whispered conversation resume, words like disgrace and improper floating through the air like poison. "That will be $2.15, Mr. Henderson said, still not meeting her eyes. Margaret counted out the coins carefully, her funds running dangerously low. She had been searching for work since arriving in Mojave, but no one would hire a divorced woman. The respectable positions as a schoolteacher or seamstress were firmly denied to her. Even the laundry work had been refused when the owner's wife discovered her marital status. As she gathered her packages, the door opened again, and a different energy filled the room. Margaret glanced up to see a tall man enter, his broad shoulders blocking the bright sunlight momentarily. He removed his hat, revealing dark hair slightly graying at the temples, and nodded to the room in general. "Afternoon, folks. Henderson, I need to settle my account and place an order." "Of course, Mr. Turner. Be right with you," Henderson said, his voice considerably warmer than it had been moments before. Margaret tried to slip past, but one of her packages shifted, and she had to stop to adjust her grip. The man, Mr. Turner, stepped aside immediately. "Here, let me help you with that," he said, reaching for the flour sack. "No, thank you, I can manage," Margaret said quickly, not wanting to cause him any social damage by association. He smiled, a genuine expression that reached his dark eyes. "I am sure you can, but there is no harm in accepting help when it is offered in good faith." Before she could protest, he had taken the flour sack and held the door open for her. Margaret had no choice but to walk through, hearing the renewed whispers behind her. Outside, she stopped and turned to him. "Please give me my flour. I do not want to cause you any trouble with the good people of this town." His expression shifted slightly, understanding crossing his features. "You must be Mrs. Keller. I have heard about you." Margaret's heart sank. "Then you know you should not be seen helping me, Mr. Turner. Your reputation will suffer." He laughed, a rich sound that seemed at odds with the tension of the moment. "My reputation can withstand being seen carrying a flour sack for a lady. Where are you staying? I will walk with you." "Really, that is not necessary." Perhaps not necessary, but the right thing to do nonetheless. A gentleman does not let a lady struggle with heavy packages in this heat. Margaret studied him for a moment. He appeared to be in his early 30s, with weathered skin that spoke of years working outdoors. His clothes were practical but well-made, and his manner was confident without being arrogant. Most importantly, his eyes held no judgment, no speculation, just simple kindness. "I am staying above the telegraph office," she finally said. They walked in silence for a moment, Margaret acutely aware of the stares following them. "You are going to regret this kindness," she said softly. "I doubt that very much. I am David Turner. I own a ranch about 5 miles north of town. Been here for about 8 years now. Margaret Keller, as you already know. May I ask what brought you to Mojave, Mrs. Keller? We do not get many new residents, especially ladies traveling alone." Margaret hesitated. She had told this story before, and it never got easier. "I needed a fresh start. My former husband lives in Sacramento with his new wife. I thought distance might help people forget, but it seems scandal travels faster than the railway." They reached the telegraph office, and Margaret fumbled for her key. David set the flour sack down gently by her door. "People in small towns have long memories and short imaginations," he said. "They will find something new to gossip about eventually. In my experience, a divorced woman remains interesting conversation far longer than one might hope." Margaret unlocked the door and picked up her packages. "Thank you for your help, Mr. Turner. I truly appreciate your kindness." "Have you found work here in town?" he asked suddenly. Margaret felt her cheeks flush again. "Not yet. I am still looking." David was quiet for a moment, studying her with an intensity that made her want to look away. "I am in need of someone to help with the bookkeeping at my ranch. My foreman, Charlie, is excellent with cattle but terrible with numbers. We have been falling behind on the paperwork, and I need someone organized and trustworthy. Would you be interested?" Margaret stared at him in disbelief. "Mr. Turner, did you not hear what I said? I am divorced. Hiring me would damage your standing in this community. My ranch is 5 miles out of town. The only people who need to be concerned with who I hire are me and my employees. Charlie and his wife Rosa live on the property, along with 3 ranch hands. None of them care about Mojave gossip. The pay would be $30 a month plus meals while you are working. You would come out 3 days a week, handle the books, help Rosa with correspondence when needed, and return to town in the evenings." $30 a month was more than Margaret had dared hope for. It would be enough to keep her room and feed herself with a little left over. But she could not shake the feeling that accepting would somehow damage this kind man. "Why would you do this? You do not know anything about me except that I am the subject of town gossip." David smiled again. "I know you carried 3 heavy packages by yourself rather than ask for help. I know you are polite to people who treat you poorly. And I know you are trying to warn me away from helping you because you are worried about my reputation. That tells me you are proud, kind, and thoughtful. Those seem like good qualities in a bookkeeper." "I could be terrible with numbers," Margaret pointed out, though her heart was racing with hope. "Are you?" "No. I kept the books for my father's dry goods store in San Francisco until he passed away 3 years ago. I am quite good with figures, actually. Then I will see you tomorrow morning." "Do you have a horse?" Margaret shook her head. "I sold mine to pay for my passage here. I will bring a gentle mare for you. Be ready at 7. Wear practical clothes for riding." He tipped his hat to her and walked away before she could protest further. Margaret stood in the doorway, watching him go, feeling something unfamiliar stirring in her chest. It took her a moment to recognize it as hope. That evening, as she ate a simple dinner of bread and cheese in her small room, Margaret allowed herself to think about her past for the first time in weeks. She had married Thomas Keller when she was 19, believing herself in love with the charming banker's son. The first year had been tolerable, but by the second year, Thomas's charm had revealed itself as manipulation. He criticized everything about her, from how she kept house to how she dressed. When she failed to become pregnant, he blamed her openly, telling anyone who would listen that she was barren and useless. The final straw came when she discovered he had been carrying on an affair with the daughter of a prominent Sacramento family. When Margaret confronted him, he laughed and told her she should be grateful he looked elsewhere since she was such a disappointment. She had filed for divorce the next week, a scandalous action that had shocked Sacramento society. Her mother-in-law had made sure every detail was spread throughout the city, painting Margaret as a cold, difficult woman who drove her husband to seek comfort elsewhere. With her father dead and no other family, Margaret had endured 6 months of whispers and closed doors before deciding to leave. She had chosen Mojave because it was far enough from Sacramento to feel like escape, but close enough to civilization to offer opportunities. That calculation had proven optimistic. The story of her divorce had somehow preceded her, probably carried by a traveling merchant or a gossiping railroad passenger. Now, lying on her narrow bed and listening to the sounds of Mojave settling for the night, Margaret wondered if David Turner was real or if desperation had made her imagine him. But at 7 the next morning, when she stepped outside in her most practical dress with her hair braided and pinned up, he was there with 2 horses. "Good morning, Mrs. Keller," he said cheerfully. "This is Daisy. She has a gentle disposition and will treat you well." The mare was a pretty chestnut with kind eyes. Margaret approached slowly, letting the horse sniff her hand before stroking her neck. "Hello, Daisy. We are going to be friends, I think." David helped her mount, and they set off through the still cool morning air. As they left the town behind, Margaret felt the tension she had been carrying for months begin to ease slightly. Out here, with the vast desert stretching in all directions and the mountains visible in the distance, the opinions of Mojave seemed smaller, less important. "Tell me about your ranch," she said as they rode. "I started with a small herd and about 500 acres 8 years ago. Now I am up to nearly 2,000 acres and 300 head of cattle. It is not the biggest operation in California, but it is mine, and it is profitable. Charlie Ross has been with me for 6 years. He is the best foreman in the state, and his wife Rosa is the finest cook you will ever meet. The Hands are decent men who work hard and keep to themselves. You will be safe there, Mrs. Keller. I want you to know that." The emphasis on safety touched Margaret. He understood, without her having to explain, that a woman in her position would worry about such things. "Please call me Margaret. Mrs. Keller feels like a name that belongs to someone else now. Only if you call me David. Mr. Turner makes me feel ancient." They rode in companionable silence for a while, and Margaret found herself relaxing further. The morning sun warmed her shoulders, and the rhythmic movement of the horse was soothing. When they crested a rise, David pointed ahead. "There it is. Welcome to the Running T Ranch." The ranch spread out before them in a small valley, protected from the worst winds by the surrounding hills. A large main house built of adobe and wood stood at the center, with a barn, stable, bunkhouse, and several other outbuildings arranged around it. Fences marked off various corrals and pastures where cattle grazed peacefully. It was well maintained and prosperous looking, a testament to hard work and good management. As they approached, a stocky man with graying hair emerged from the barn, shading his eyes against the sun. A woman appeared on the porch of the main house, wiping her hands on her apron. "That is Charlie and Rosa," David said. "I told them I was bringing someone to help with the books. They have been after me for months to get organized. David helped Margaret dismount, and she found herself facing the couple with a mixture of nervousness and determination. Charlie Ross had the weathered look of a man who had spent his life outdoors, but his expression was open and friendly. Rosa was a handsome woman in her 40s with warm brown eyes and a welcoming smile. "Charlie, Rosa, this is Margaret Keller. She is going to bring order to our chaotic bookkeeping. Margaret, Charlie Ross is my foreman, and Rosa keeps us all fed and the house running." "Welcome," Rosa said warmly, coming down the porch steps. "David has been drowning in papers for months. You are an answer to prayers." Charlie nodded in agreement. "If you can make sense of his system such as it is, you are a miracle worker." Margaret felt herself relaxing under their genuine welcome. "I will certainly do my best. Let me show you the office," David said, gesturing toward the house. "We set up a room off the main parlor for paperwork, but it has gotten rather out of hand." That proved to be an understatement. The office was a small room with a large desk, filing cabinets, and shelves, all of which were covered in papers, ledgers, receipts, and correspondence in no discernible order. Margaret stood in the doorway, taking it all in. "I know," David said sheepishly. "It is worse than I thought when I invited you. If you would rather not tackle this disaster, I would understand." Margaret set down her small bag and rolled up her sleeves. "Show me your system such as it is." For the next several hours, David explained how he had been attempting to keep track of cattle sales, feed purchases, equipment costs, payroll, and the 100 other financial details of running a ranch. His system, which amounted to throwing papers in roughly sorted piles and hoping to find them again when needed, was indeed chaotic. But as Margaret asked questions and began sorting through the mess, she could see that the underlying business was sound. David was a good rancher who simply needed help with organization. "You have a profitable operation here," she said, making notes. "You are just making it harder on yourself than it needs to be. I can set up a proper filing system and get your ledgers current. It might take a few weeks to sort through all this backlog, but once we are caught up, maintaining it should be straightforward." David looked relieved. "I cannot tell you how glad I am to hear that. I am good with cattle and horses, decent at mending fences and managing men, but this," he gestured at the papers, "this defeats me every time." Rosa brought in lunch: fresh bread, cold roast beef, cheese, and cool water. They ate on the porch, and Margaret found herself enjoying the easy conversation. Charlie told stories about particularly stubborn cattle. Rosa shared plans for her vegetable garden, and David listened with the comfortable quiet of a man at ease with his life. "How long have you all been in California?" Margaret asked. "I came from Colorado about 10 years ago," David said. "Wanted to build something of my own rather than work someone else's ranch." "Charlie and I came from Texas 12 years ago," Rosa said. "We were tired of the heat and the politics. California promised fresh starts." "It seems California attracts people looking for fresh starts," Margaret observed quietly. Rosa met her eyes with understanding. "It is a good place for that. People here are too busy making their own way to worry much about where you came from." "Unless you live in town," Margaret said before she could stop herself. Charlie snorted. "Town folk got nothing better to do than gossip. Out here, we got too much work for that nonsense." The warmth of their acceptance made Margaret's throat tight. She had been so starved for simple kindness that this ordinary conversation felt extraordinary. She worked through the afternoon, making steady progress on organizing the chaos. David checked in periodically, answering questions and providing information she needed. As the sun began to sink toward the horizon, he appeared in the doorway. "We should head back to town soon. I do not want to have you riding after dark." Margaret looked at the work still remaining and felt frustrated. "There is so much still to do. It will wait for tomorrow. This mess took months to create. It will take time to fix. You have made excellent progress today." On the ride back to Mojave, Margaret found herself telling David about her father's store, how she had loved the orderly rows of figures in the ledgers, the satisfaction of balancing accounts perfectly. He listened with genuine interest, asking questions that showed he understood the skill involved. "You really do enjoy this work," he observed. "I do. There is something comforting about numbers. They are honest and straightforward. 2 plus 2 always equals 4, no matter what anyone thinks about it. Unlike people." "Unlike people," Margaret agreed softly. They reached the telegraph office as the last light was fading. David helped her dismount, and for a moment they stood close together, his hands still at her waist. Margaret felt her breath catch, acutely aware of his presence. "Thank you for today," she said, stepping back. "For the work, and for treating me like a person instead of a scandal." "Thank you for bringing order to my chaos," he replied. "I will see you tomorrow morning, same time. I will be ready." Over the following weeks, a routine developed. Margaret would ride out to the ranch 3 mornings a week, spend the day working on the books while David and Charlie managed the ranch operations, share meals with the small household, and return to town in the evenings. The work was satisfying, and she made steady progress. More importantly, she found herself looking forward to the time at the ranch, to the conversations over meals, to the easy acceptance of David, Charlie, and Rosa. But in town, the situation worsened. Word had spread that David Turner was employing the divorced woman, and the gossip intensified. Mrs. Patterson made sure everyone knew she found it scandalous. Mr. Henderson began to treat Margaret with even more cold formality. When she attended Sunday services, hoping to show she was a decent, God-fearing woman, she felt the eyes following her, heard the whispers. After church one Sunday, a woman Margaret had not met before approached her. She was elegantly dressed in a deep blue traveling suit, her blonde hair perfectly coiffed. "You must be Margaret Keller," the woman said, her voice carrying the saccharine sweetness of poison honey. "I am Victoria Langston. My father owns the largest cattle operation in the county. Pleased to meet you, Miss Langston. Mrs. Langston, actually, though I am recently widowed." Victoria's eyes were calculating. "I understand you are working for David Turner. How enterprising of you to find employment despite your unfortunate circumstances." Margaret felt the insult beneath the polite words. "Mr. Turner needed assistance with his bookkeeping. I am qualified for the work." "I am sure you are. David has always been kind to strays and unfortunates. It is one of his more admirable qualities, though it does leave him vulnerable to being taken advantage of by those who might have ulterior motives." The implication was clear. Margaret felt her face flush with anger. "I assure you, Mrs. Langston, my only interest in Mr. Turner is professional. He has given me honest work, and I am grateful for the opportunity." "Of course. Still, people do talk, and a man in David's position needs to be careful about his associations. He will need a proper wife eventually, someone who can help him build his standing in the community, not someone who damages it." Victoria smiled, and it did not reach her eyes. "I just thought I should mention it, woman to woman. You would not want to become too attached to a situation that cannot possibly last." She swept away before Margaret could respond, leaving her standing alone in front of the church, trembling with anger and humiliation. The warning was clear. Victoria Langston had set her sights on David Turner, and she would not tolerate competition from a divorced woman with no social standing. That week, Margaret threw herself into her work, trying not to think about Victoria's words. But on Wednesday morning, when she arrived at the ranch, she found an elegant buggy parked near the house. Her heart sank. Rosa met her at the door with an apologetic expression. "Mrs. Langston arrived an hour ago. She said she needed to discuss some cattle business with David." Margaret could hear voices from the parlor, Victoria's light laugh carrying through the house. She moved quietly toward the office, hoping to avoid an encounter, but David emerged from the parlor with Victoria on his arm. "Margaret, good morning," he said, and something in his expression told her he was not enjoying Victoria's visit. "Mrs. Langston was just leaving." "Oh, but David, we have so much more to discuss," Victoria protested prettily. "Unless you feel your bookkeeper cannot work with visitors present." "I am sure Margaret can work anywhere," David said firmly. "But you mentioned you had other calls to make in town." Victoria's eyes flicked to Margaret, cold despite her smile. "Of course. I will see you at the dance on Saturday, David. You did promise me the first waltz." "I said I would attend the dance. I do not recall promising specific dances." "Oh, you are such a tease." Victoria laughed, squeezing his arm before finally releasing him. She swept past Margaret without acknowledgement, and soon they heard the sound of her buggy departing. David let out a long breath. "That woman is relentless." "She is very beautiful," Margaret said carefully, moving toward the office. "She is very calculating. Her father has been trying to merge our ranches since her husband died last year. Victoria has apparently decided the best way to accomplish that is to become the next Mrs. Turner." Margaret's heart twisted, but she kept her voice neutral. "That would be advantageous for your ranch. The Langston operation is substantial." David followed her into the office. "I am not interested in advantageous marriages, and I am certainly not interested in Victoria Langston. She has visited 3 times in the past 2 weeks, always with some thin excuse about cattle or property boundaries. It is becoming tiresome. She warned me on Sunday to not become too attached to my position here. She said you would need a proper wife eventually, someone who could help your standing rather than damage it." David's expression darkened. "She said that to you." She was not wrong. "Your association with me does damage your reputation in town. Everyone is talking about it. Let them talk." David moved closer, his expression intense. "Margaret, I do not care what the gossips say. You are an excellent bookkeeper, you are kind and intelligent, and I enjoy your company. Nothing Victoria Langston or anyone else says will change that." Margaret wanted to believe him, but she had learned hard lessons about the power of social opinion. "You say that now, but eventually the pressure will mount. You will want to marry someone suitable, and having me here will complicate that. What if I told you I have no interest in anyone the town deems suitable? What if I said I look forward to our mornings riding out here, to our conversations over lunch, to seeing you bent over those ledgers with that little furrow of concentration between your eyebrows?" Margaret's breath caught. "David, you cannot say such things." "Why not if they are true?" He took another step closer. "From the first day I met you, struggling with those packages and trying to warn me away to protect my reputation, I admired you. These past weeks, working with you, getting to know you, that admiration has grown into something much stronger. I am divorced. That scandal will never go away. Any association with me will taint you. I am a rancher, not a politician. I do not need the approval of a town full of small-minded gossips. What I need is someone honest and strong, someone who has faced hardship and come through it with grace. Someone exactly like you." Margaret felt tears prick her eyes. "You do not know the whole story. My husband divorced me because I could not give him children. The doctors said I probably never will. What kind of future is that for a man who needs sons to help run his ranch?" David reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and cupped her face in his hands. "What I need is a partner, not a broodmare. If we are blessed with children, I will be grateful. If not, I will be equally content as long as I have you. Margaret, I am falling in love with you. Tell me I am alone in this, and I will never mention it again. But if you feel even a fraction of what I feel, give us a chance." Margaret looked into his dark eyes and saw sincerity, warmth, and hope. She thought of the weeks she had spent getting to know him, how safe she felt in his presence, how he made her laugh, how he never once made her feel less than whole and worthy. She thought of his kindness, his integrity, his quiet strength. "I feel it too," she whispered, "but I am terrified. I have been through this before. I believed in love once and it destroyed me. I am not Thomas Keller. I will spend every day proving that to you if you let me. We will take it slowly, let you learn to trust again. But please, Margaret, do not let fear steal something that could be wonderful." She nodded, unable to speak past the tightness in her throat. David smiled, that warm, genuine smile that had drawn her from the first, and gently kissed her forehead. "Now, I believe you have some bookkeeping to torture me with, and I have cattle to check on. But tomorrow, instead of just riding straight here, would you like to take a longer route? There is a beautiful spot by the creek I would like to show you." "I would like that very much." The next morning dawned clear and beautiful. True to his word, David took her on a winding path that led to a creek lined with cottonwood trees, a rare and precious sight in the desert landscape. They let the horses drink while sitting on the bank, and David told her stories about growing up in Colorado, about his dreams of having his own land, about the hard work and setbacks of building the ranch. Margaret found herself telling him things she had never spoken of to anyone. About how lonely her marriage had been, how Thomas had made her feel worthless, how the divorce had left her feeling broken and unlovable. David listened without judgment, his hand finding hers and holding it firmly. "You are none of the things he told you," David said when she finished. "You are strong and capable and very much lovable. He was a fool who did not deserve you." Over the following weeks, their relationship deepened. They stole moments together between her work on the books and his ranch duties. He taught her to lasso fence posts, laughing when her first attempts went wild. She helped him mend a saddle, discovering she had a knack for leather work. They rode out to check on cattle together, and he showed her the far corners of his property, sharing his plans for expansion and improvement. But the town's disapproval grew more vocal. One afternoon, when Margaret stopped at the general store, Mrs. Patterson confronted her directly. "You should be ashamed of yourself, throwing yourself at David Turner that way. Everyone knows you are trying to trap him into marriage. A decent woman would have more self-respect." Margaret felt the familiar burn of humiliation but forced herself to meet the woman's eyes. "I am working as his bookkeeper, Mrs. Patterson, nothing more." "That is not what Victoria Langston says. She says you have been making improper advances, trying to compromise him into marriage. That poor man taken advantage of by a desperate divorcee." "That is a lie." Margaret's voice rose before she could control it. "I have done nothing improper. Where there is smoke, there is fire. You mark my words, this will end badly for everyone involved." Mrs. Patterson swept out, leaving Margaret standing in the store with everyone staring at her. That evening, when David brought her back to town, she told him what had happened. His jaw tightened with anger. "Victoria is spreading lies now. This has gone too far." "Maybe I should leave Mojave," Margaret said miserably. "Find another town where no one knows my history. And let them drive you away." "No, Margaret, I have been thinking about this, and I have a solution if you are willing." "What kind of solution?" David took a deep breath. "Marry me. Not someday, not after a long courtship to satisfy propriety. Marry me this week. Once you are Mrs. Turner, they cannot gossip about you working at the ranch. You will have the protection of my name and my position. And more importantly, I want you to. I love you, Margaret. I know it has only been 2 months, but I am more certain of this than anything else in my life." Margaret stared at him in shock. "You want to marry me to stop gossip?" "No, I want to marry you because I love you and want to spend my life with you. Stopping the gossip is just a beneficial side effect." He took her hands. "I know this is fast. I know you are still healing from what Thomas did to you. But I also know that life is uncertain, and when you find something real, you should not let it slip away. Will you marry me?" Margaret's mind raced. 2 months ago, she had been alone and hopeless, convinced she would never trust anyone again. Now this good, kind man was offering her everything she had thought lost forever. But the scars from her first marriage ran deep. "What if I disappoint you? What if you realize you made a mistake, tied yourself to damaged goods?" David pulled her close, tilting her chin up so she had to meet his eyes. "You are not damaged goods. You are the strongest, bravest woman I know, and you could never disappoint me. Margaret, I see you. The real you, not some image the town has created, and I love exactly who you are." "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will marry you." He kissed her then, a gentle kiss full of promise and hope. When they pulled apart, both were smiling despite the tears on Margaret's cheeks. "We will go to the justice of the peace tomorrow," David said. "Charlie and Rosa can be our witnesses. Then you can move out to the ranch where you belong. The town will explode with scandal. Let it. They can either accept that you are my wife and treat you with respect, or they can do without my business and my presence at town functions. I suspect they will come around quickly once they realize I am serious." The next afternoon, Margaret Keller became Margaret Turner in a simple ceremony at the Justice of the Peace's office. She wore her best dress, and David had brought wildflowers he picked that morning. Charlie and Rosa stood witness, both beaming with happiness. After the ceremony, they returned to the ranch for a celebratory dinner that Rosa had prepared. "Welcome home, Mrs. Turner," Rosa said, hugging Margaret tightly. "This house has needed a woman's touch, and more importantly, David has needed someone like you." That night, Margaret stood in what was now her bedroom, the master bedroom of the ranch house that she would share with David, and felt overwhelmed. David came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "Having second thoughts?" he asked gently. "No. Just shocked that my life can change so completely in such a short time. 2 months ago I was alone and hopeless. Now I have a husband, a home, people who care about me. You have given me just as much. This house was just a building before. Now it is a home." He turned her in his arms. "I know you are nervous. We can take this as slowly as you need. I am a patient man." Margaret looked at this man who had seen past her scandal to her worth, who had offered her not just marriage but genuine love and partnership. She reached up and kissed him, trying to pour all her gratitude and growing love into the gesture. "I am nervous," she admitted, "but not about this. Not about us. Thomas made me feel unwanted and broken. You make me feel whole and precious. That is worth any fear." Their wedding night was tender and sweet, David patient and gentle, showing her that intimacy could be an expression of love rather than obligation or disappointment. Afterward, lying in his arms in the quiet darkness, Margaret felt something she had not experienced in years: complete safety. As expected, the news of their marriage caused an uproar in Mojave. Victoria Langston was reportedly furious, spreading even wilder tales about Margaret trapping David. Mrs. Patterson and her circle of gossips worked themselves into fits of moral outrage. But David was true to his word. When he went to town for supplies the next week, He made it clear that anyone who wished to continue doing business with the Running T Ranch would treat his wife with respect. The message was received. David Turner was one of the more prosperous ranchers in the area, and his business was valuable. The bank president was the first to extend an olive branch, sending a note of congratulations. Mr. Henderson at the general store followed suit. One by one, the practical considerations of economics overcame moral posturing. Margaret discovered that being Mrs. David Turner was very different from being divorced Mrs. Margaret Keller. People who had cut her dead on the street now nodded politely. Women who had whispered about her scandal now invited her to social functions. The hypocrisy was breathtaking, but David helped her navigate it with humor and grace. "They are sheep," he said one evening after a particularly awkward encounter at church. "They follow whoever seems to be leading. Now that you are established as my wife, they will fall in line. It still makes me angry. 2 months ago, these same women treated me like dirt. Then do not do it for them. Do it for yourself. You deserve to be part of a community, to have friends and a social life. Do not let their earlier behavior deprive you of that." Margaret took his advice to heart. Slowly, cautiously, she began to rebuild a social life. Rosa became her closest friend, teaching her the intricacies of ranch management and desert gardening. A few of the younger women in town, less rigid in their judgments, reached out with genuine friendliness. Margaret found herself chairing a committee to raise funds for a new schoolhouse, using her organizational skills for the community's benefit. Victoria Langston remained an enemy, shooting poisonous looks whenever they crossed paths. But even Victoria could not publicly snub Mrs. David Turner without consequences. Her defeat was made complete 6 months after David and Margaret's wedding, when Victoria suddenly married a cattle buyer from Los Angeles and moved away. The gossips found new topics, and gradually, Margaret's divorce became old news. Life on the ranch settled into a comfortable rhythm. Margaret continued managing the books, which were now in perfect order. She took over managing the household, working alongside Rosa to keep everything running smoothly. She learned to ride better, often accompanying David on his rounds. Charlie taught her to identify sick cattle and treat minor injuries. She discovered she had a gift for training horses, patiently working with the younger animals. But despite the happiness of her days, one shadow remained. Month after month passed with no sign of pregnancy. Margaret saw the worried looks Rosa sometimes gave her, heard the whispered conversations that stopped when she entered a room. She knew the ranch hands and townspeople were speculating, waiting to see if the Turner marriage would produce an heir. One night, nearly a year after their wedding, Margaret broke down crying in David's arms. "I am failing you. Everyone is waiting for me to give you children, and I cannot. Just like before, I am broken." David held her tightly, stroking her hair. "You are not failing me. You could never fail me. And you are certainly not broken. Margaret, listen to me. I did not marry you to breed cattle. I married you because I love you. If we have children, wonderful. If not, I still have everything I need right here in my arms. But the ranch needs heirs. Your work needs someone to pass it to. Then we will find another way. We could take in orphans who need homes. We could leave the ranch to Charlie and Rosa's nephews. There are 100 solutions that do not require you to torture yourself about this. Please, love, stop measuring your worth by something you cannot control." His words helped, but the fear lingered. Margaret knew how quickly love could turn to resentment when expectations went unmet. She braced herself for the subtle changes, the growing disappointment, the eventual contempt. But months passed, and David remained loving, passionate, and devoted. He never complained, never showed frustration, never made her feel less than cherished. In the spring of 1884, nearly 2 years after their marriage, Margaret woke feeling strange. She said nothing, afraid to hope, but when the nausea continued for days, Rosa noticed. "Margaret, when was your last monthly time?" Rosa asked gently one morning as they worked in the kitchen garden. Margaret counted back and felt her heart start to race. "I am late, but I have been late before. It does not mean anything, or it means everything. Give it another week, and if you are still feeling poorly, we will call for the doctor." Margaret went through the next week in a state of anxious hope. She did not tell David, could not bear to raise his hopes only to have them crushed. But when the doctor confirmed what she barely dared believe, she felt overwhelming joy mixed with terror. She told David that evening, out by the creek where he had first told her he loved her. "I saw the doctor today. He says I am pregnant. About 2 months along, he thinks." David stared at her for a long moment, and then he lifted her up and spun her around, laughing with pure joy. "A baby! We are going to have a baby." "I am scared," Margaret admitted when he set her down. "What if something goes wrong? What if I lose the baby, or what if the doctor is wrong? Then we will face whatever comes together. But for now, let yourself be happy." "This is wonderful news, Margaret." The pregnancy was difficult. Margaret was sick for months, losing weight rather than gaining it. The doctor visited regularly, concerned but cautiously optimistic. David hovered anxiously, trying not to show his worry. Rosa moved into the main house to help care for Margaret during the worst days. By the 6th month, the sickness finally eased, and Margaret began to truly show. She felt the baby move for the first time while sitting at the desk in the office, and the flutter of life inside her brought tears of wonder. She called for David, and he came running, thinking something was wrong. "The baby moved," she said, guiding his hand to her belly. "There, can you feel it?" They sat together, his hand on her growing stomach, waiting for another kick. When it came, David's expression of awe made Margaret fall in love with him all over again. "Our child," he whispered. "Our little miracle." As her belly grew, Margaret had to give up some of her more active ranch work, but she continued managing the books and helping Rosa when she could. The townspeople, seeing her obvious pregnancy, seemed to collectively relax. The last questions about the Turner marriage were put to rest. Even Mrs. Patterson managed a grudging nod of approval. In January 1885, on a cold night with wind howling outside, Margaret went into labor. Rosa and the doctor worked together while David paced the hallway, pale with worry. The labor was long and hard, and there were moments when the doctor looked grave. But finally, as dawn broke, a baby's cry filled the house. "A boy," the doctor announced, carrying the squalling infant to Margaret. "A healthy, strong boy." Margaret held her son, tears streaming down her face, and marveled at the tiny, perfect human she and David had created. When David was allowed in, he knelt beside the bed, touching the baby's tiny hand with one finger. "He is perfect," David breathed. "Absolutely perfect." They named him Daniel, and he became the center of their world. David was a devoted father, taking the baby with him on ranch rounds in a specially made sling, talking to him about cattle and horses and the desert. Margaret discovered that motherhood, while exhausting, filled a space in her heart she had not known was empty. But the best part was watching David with their son. He changed diapers without complaint, walked the floor during fussy nights, and played endless silly games that made Daniel gurgle with laughter. Every moment was a gift, proof that the doctors had been wrong, that she was not barren, that she could give David the family he deserved. When Daniel was 6 months old, Margaret realized she was pregnant again. This time, she told David right away, and they shared the joy without the fear that had shadowed her first pregnancy. This pregnancy was easier, and in the spring of 1886, their daughter arrived, a tiny girl they named Melissa. With 2 young children, the ranch house became livelier and more chaotic. Rosa delighted in having babies around again. Charlie carved wooden toys and told elaborate stories. The ranch hands treated the children like nephews and nieces, teaching them to ride almost before they could walk. Margaret often found herself stopping in the middle of ordinary moments, overcome with gratitude for the life she had built. She thought of that scared, lonely woman who had arrived in Mojave 4 years ago, judged and rejected by everyone. If someone had told her then that she would have a loving husband, 2 beautiful children, a prosperous home, and the respect of her community, she would have thought them cruel for offering false hope. But it was all real. The love she and David shared deepened with every passing year, through sleepless nights with sick children, through hard seasons when the cattle prices dropped, through illness and worry and joy. They had built something solid and true, a partnership based on genuine love and mutual respect. When Daniel was 5 and Melissa was 3, they added a 3rd child to their family, a boy they named Marcus. David joked that they were building their own ranch crew, but his eyes were soft with contentment as he said it. The town of Mojave had changed too. The railroad brought more people, more commerce, more diversity. New families arrived, bringing fresh perspectives and diluting the power of the old guard. The scandal of Margaret's divorce had long since been forgotten, replaced by newer, juicier gossip. She was now known simply as Mrs. Turner, the rancher's wife, the woman who ran the church social committee and hosted lovely dinners and raised 3 well-mannered children. Victoria Langston never returned to Mojave, but Margaret occasionally heard news of her through traveling merchants. She had divorced her 2nd husband and remarried a railroad executive. Margaret felt only pity for her now, understanding that Victoria's calculating nature would always prevent her from finding real happiness. On a warm evening in the summer of 1890, Margaret sat on the porch watching David teach Daniel and Melissa to rope fence posts. Marcus toddled around the yard, chasing chickens and laughing. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Rosa brought out lemonade and sat beside her. "You look pensive," Rosa observed. "Just thinking about how different my life is from what I expected. 8 years ago, I thought my life was over. I thought I would spend the rest of my days alone, judged and rejected. Instead, you found love and built a family. David saved me. He saw value in me when everyone else saw only scandal." Rosa patted her hand. "He gave you an opportunity, yes, but you saved yourself, Margaret. You had the courage to take that opportunity, to trust again, to open your heart despite having been hurt. That took strength that not everyone has." Margaret considered this as she watched her family in the golden evening light. Maybe Rosa was right. David had offered his hand, but she had been the one to take it. She had chosen to believe in the possibility of happiness despite all her reasons to doubt. She had worked to overcome her fears, to trust not just David but herself. "Mrs. Turner," Daniel called, "watch me rope this post." "I am watching," Margaret called back, using the name that had once felt so strange and now fit perfectly. Daniel's lasso flew through the air and somehow miraculously caught the post. He whooped with triumph while David laughed and congratulated him. Melissa demanded her turn, and Marcus tried to grab the rope, causing general chaos and laughter. That night, after the children were finally asleep and the house was quiet, Margaret and David sat together in their bedroom. He was reading correspondence while she mended one of Daniel's shirts. "Charlie wants to discuss expanding the herd next year," David said. "He thinks we can manage another 100 head if we improve the water situation in the north pasture." "What do you think?" Margaret asked, setting down her mending. "I think it is a good idea if we can afford the initial investment. The books are healthy enough to support it, are they not? More than healthy. We have had 3 excellent years. The expansion makes sense. David set aside his letters and pulled her close. I never tire of saying we. I love that we make these decisions together, that you understand every aspect of the ranch as well as I do. You made me a partner from the beginning. Not every husband would do that. Then not every husband is as smart as I am. He kissed her forehead. Though I was smart enough to fall in love with a woman carrying packages in the street and stubborn enough not to let her push me away. Margaret laughed. I tried very hard to discourage you, did I not? Spectacularly hard. You kept warning me about my reputation, about how association with you would damage my standing. Do you remember? I was terrified you would wake up one day and regret taking a chance on me. And now? Margaret looked into his eyes, seeing the love and devotion that had never wavered in 8 years. Now I know you meant every word you said, that you love me not despite my past, but as part of the whole person I am, that you see my scars as proof of survival, not signs of damage. They are proof of survival. You are the strongest person I know, Margaret. You faced judgment and rejection and kept your dignity and kindness intact. You rebuilt your life from nothing. You learned to trust again after being betrayed. Those are not small things. I could not have done any of it without you. We saved each other, I think. I was turning into a lonely workaholic before you arrived. All I thought about was cattle and fences and profit margins. You taught me about partnership, about building a life instead of just running a business. You gave me a family and a real home. I am the one who should be grateful. They sat together in comfortable silence, holding each other as the night deepened around them. Somewhere in the house, one of the children made a sound in their sleep, and both parents listened until they heard the even breathing resume. 3 children, David said softly. When I think about how the doctors told you that you probably could not have children, and now we have 3 beautiful, healthy little ones running around. Miracles happen, Margaret said. I am proof of that. My whole life now is a miracle I did not dare hope for. Over the following years, the ranch continued to prosper. Daniel grew into a tall, serious boy who shared his father's love of cattle ranching. Melissa was adventurous and fearless, constantly climbing things and exploring. Marcus was the charmer, able to talk his way out of trouble with a smile. In 1893, they welcomed a 4th child, another daughter they named Martha. Margaret found herself busier than ever, managing the household, the books, and 4 active children. But she loved every moment of the chaos. The house that had once seemed so large and empty now rang with laughter and arguments, and the thundering of young feet on the stairs. The town of Mojave continued to evolve. The railroad brought prosperity and growth. New businesses opened. A proper school was built, largely funded by Margaret's tireless committee work. She had become one of the respected matrons of the community, sought after for her organizational skills and generous spirit. One afternoon in 1895, Margaret was sorting donations for the church charity drive when a young woman approached her hesitantly. She was poorly dressed and had a fading bruise on her cheek. Mrs. Turner, my name is Sarah Mills. I am new to town, and I was wondering if you might know of any work available. Margaret studied the young woman, seeing herself 13 years ago, though Sarah looked even more beaten down by life. What brings you to Mojave, Miss Mills? Mrs. Mills, actually. I am recently separated from my husband. He was not a kind man. Sarah touched her bruised cheek unconsciously. I know that makes me unsuitable for most positions, but I am desperate. I can clean, cook, sew, anything. Margaret's heart ached with recognition. Can you read and write? Yes, madam. My father was a teacher back east. Then I may have something for you. We need someone to help teach the younger children at the school. It does not pay much, but it is respectable work, and the community needs all the teachers we can find. Would you be interested?" Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "You would recommend me, even knowing about my situation, especially knowing about your situation. Everyone deserves a chance to rebuild their life, Mrs. Mills. I know that better than most." Sarah looked confused, and Margaret realized this young woman had no idea about her own past. The scandal that had once defined her was now forgotten, erased by years of respectability and good works. "Come to my ranch tomorrow," Margaret continued. "We will discuss the details, and I will introduce you to some people who can help you get established. You should not face this alone." As Sarah left, clearly overwhelmed with gratitude, Margaret felt the circle close. She had been where Sarah was, frightened and alone, judged for circumstances beyond her control. Now she had the power and position to offer others the same chance David had offered her. That evening she told David about Sarah Mills. He listened and then smiled. "You are going to take her under your wing, are you not?" "How can I not? She is me 13 years ago, desperately in need of someone to see past the scandal to the person underneath. Then of course you must help her." "That is who you are, Margaret. You never forgot what it felt like to be judged and rejected, so you make sure others do not have to face that alone. It is one of the many reasons I love you." Margaret did help Sarah Mills, using her connections to secure the teaching position and helping the younger woman find decent lodging. She introduced her to the right people, subtly making it clear that Sarah had her protection and support. Within months, Sarah was established in the community, proving to be an excellent teacher. Within a year, she had caught the eye of the bank clerk, a kind young man who did not care about her past. They married in a small ceremony, and Sarah became another success story, another woman who rebuilt her life after hardship. As the new century approached, Margaret and David's children were growing into remarkable young people. Daniel, at 14, was already invaluable on the ranch, showing the same instinct for cattle that his father possessed. Melissa, at 12, was proving to be a gifted horsewoman, training their animals with patience and skill. Marcus, at 9, had his mother's head for numbers and loved helping with the books. Little Martha, at 6, was the baby of the family, adored by everyone and showing signs of being as strong-willed as her mother. On New Year's Eve, 1899, the Turner family hosted a celebration at the ranch. Charlie and Rosa were there, of course, now in their 60s and officially retired but still helping out daily. The ranch hands, some of whom had been with David for over 15 years, brought their families. Friends from town filled the house. Sarah Mills and her husband came, bringing their new baby. As midnight approached, Margaret stood on the porch, taking a moment of quiet amid the celebration. She looked out over the ranch that had become her home, thinking about the journey that had brought her here. David found her there, slipping an arm around her waist. "What are you thinking about?" "Everything. How far we have come, how blessed we are, blessed indeed." He pulled her closer. "Do you remember that first day when you were trying to carry all those packages by yourself and warn me away at the same time?" Margaret laughed. "I was so certain that helping me would ruin you. I never imagined this, any of this." "I knew," David said softly. "I knew from that first moment that you were special. I did not know I would love you or that we would build this life together, but I knew you were worth knowing, worth fighting for. The town judged me. They called me a scandal, whispered about me, treated me like I was contagious. If you had not seen past that, if you had not given me a chance, I do not know what would have become of me. You would have survived. You are a survivor, Margaret, but I am eternally grateful I was the one who got to stand beside you to build this life with you. You made me better." You made everything better." The sound of the crowd inside counting down to midnight reached them. 10, 9, 8. Margaret turned in David's arms, looking at the face she had loved for 13 years, the face that still made her heart race. 3, 2, 1. "Happy New Year," they said together, and kissed as the new century began. Inside, the celebration continued, but Margaret and David stood together on the porch for a few more minutes, holding each other and watching the stars above the desert. They had weathered scandal and judgment, built a prosperous ranch and a loving family, turned skeptics into supporters, and created a legacy that would outlast them both. "I love you," Margaret said softly. "Thank you for seeing me when everyone else only saw my mistakes. Thank you for giving me a chance when no one else would. Thank you for this life." "I love you," David replied. "Thank you for trusting me when you had every reason not to. Thank you for saying yes when I asked you to marry me. Thank you for being my partner in everything. Thank you for our children, our home, our life together." They went back inside to their family and friends, to the celebration and the joy. The new century stretched ahead of them, full of possibility and promise. Their children would grow and have their own families. The ranch would continue to prosper. The community they had helped build would thrive. But more important than any of that, the love between Margaret and David Turner would endure, a testament to the power of seeing past society's judgments to the truth underneath, to the courage required to trust again after betrayal, to the beauty that can grow when two people choose each other despite every obstacle. The town had judged her for being divorced. The understanding rancher had married her anyway. And together, they had built something far stronger than scandal, far more lasting than gossip, far more precious than approval. They had built a love story for the ages, a family that would carry their values forward, and a life that proved redemption and happiness were always possible for those brave enough to reach for them. Years continued to pass in peaceful succession. Daniel took over more responsibilities on the ranch as David began to slow down, though he never fully retired. Melissa married a neighboring rancher's son, a partnership of equals that reminded everyone of David and Margaret's own marriage. Marcus went east to study business and finance, but returned to Mojave to help manage the growing commercial interests of the ranch. Martha became a teacher like Sarah Mills, dedicating herself to educating the children of Mojave. Through it all, Margaret and David remained devoted to each other. They had their disagreements, of course, their worries about children and cattle and the changing world. But they faced everything together, maintaining the partnership they had forged in those early days when the town judged, and they loved anyway. On their 25th wedding anniversary in 1908, their children threw them a grand party. The house and yards were filled with people, family, friends, ranch hands past and present, townspeople who remembered the scandal and those too young to have known about it. Sarah Mills gave a toast, speaking emotionally about how Margaret's kindness had changed her life. When it was Margaret's turn to speak, she looked around at the gathering, at all these lives they had touched, and felt overwhelmed with gratitude. 25 years ago, I arrived in Mojave a broken woman, judged and rejected. I thought my life was over. Then I met a man who saw past the scandal to the person underneath. David gave me a chance when no one else would. He loved me when I could barely love myself. He built this life with me, supported me, cherished me, and never once made me feel less than whole. Everything good in my life stems from that choice he made to help a struggling woman with too many packages and too heavy a burden. I love you, David Turner, and I thank God every day for your understanding, your kindness, and your love. David stood and kissed her to applause and cheers. And I thank God every day that you were stubborn enough to accept help from a stranger and brave enough to trust again. "You are the love of my life, Margaret Turner, and marrying you was the best decision I ever made." As the party continued, Margaret and David slipped away to their bedroom for a moment of quiet. They stood at the window, looking out over the ranch that had been the foundation of their life together. "Do you have any regrets?" David asked softly. Margaret thought about the question seriously. She thought about her first marriage, the pain and humiliation of the divorce, the lonely months before arriving in Mojave. She thought about the judgment and rejection, the fear and uncertainty. "Not a single one," she finally said, "because everything I endured led me here to you, to this life. If I could go back and change things, make my first marriage work or avoid the scandal, I would not. Because then I might never have met you. I might never have known this love, raised our children, built this life. Every hardship was worth it to end up here." David held her close. "That is exactly how I feel. Every setback, every lonely year before you, every difficulty along the way was worth it because it led us to each other. We built something real, Margaret, something lasting." They returned to the party, to their children and grandchildren, to the community they had helped shape. The evening ended with dancing under the stars, music and laughter floating across the desert night. Margaret danced with David, moving together with the ease of long partnership, and felt complete contentment. The town that had once judged her now celebrated her. The scandal that had defined her was forgotten. But more importantly, she had proven to herself that her worth was never determined by others' opinions. She had survived, rebuilt, and thrived not because the town eventually accepted her, but because she had accepted herself. Because David had shown her she was worthy of love, and she had been brave enough to believe him. As they grew older, David and Margaret became the heart of their community, the couple everyone pointed to as an example of true partnership and enduring love. They sat on the porch in rocking chairs, watching grandchildren play in the yard where their own children had played. They shared meals with multiple generations gathered around their table. They dispensed advice to young couples starting out, always emphasizing the importance of genuine partnership, of seeing the person behind society's labels, of choosing love over judgment. On a warm spring afternoon in 1915, 33 years after that first meeting in Henderson's General Store, David suffered a heart attack while working in the barn. He died with Margaret holding his hand, their children gathered around. His last words were, "Thank you for everything, my love." It was a beautiful life. Margaret grieved deeply, as one would expect after losing a partner of 3 decades. But even in her grief, she recognized the blessing. They had been given 33 years together, decades more than many couples enjoyed. They had raised 4 children, seen numerous grandchildren born, built a prosperous legacy, and loved each other every single day. At David's funeral, Margaret stood strong, surrounded by her family. She spoke about the man who had seen past scandal to possibility, who had chosen love over society's judgment, who had built a beautiful life with her through hard work and devotion. "David Turner was the finest man I ever knew," she said, her voice steady despite her tears. "He taught me that the past does not define us, that love is stronger than judgment, that partnership means facing life together through every challenge. He gave me a chance when no one else would, and in return, I gave him every piece of my heart. I will miss him every day for the rest of my life, but I will never regret a single moment we shared. We had a great love, and that love will continue through our children and their children. That is David's legacy, and it is magnificent." Margaret lived another 15 years, remaining active in the ranch management with Daniel, maintaining her friendships, and doting on her growing collection of grandchildren and great-grandchildren. She never remarried, telling anyone who asked that she had already experienced the great love of her life and needed no other. She continued to help young women who arrived in Mojave carrying their own scandals, offering them the same chance David had offered her. She became known for her wisdom, her kindness, and her refusal to judge others based on their past mistakes. Many lives were changed by her understanding and support. When Margaret passed away peacefully in her sleep in 1930, at the age of 72, her funeral was attended by hundreds of people. Her children spoke about her strength and grace. Her grandchildren talked about her kindness and wisdom. Friends and community members shared stories of her generosity and support. But the most moving tribute came from a young woman named Elizabeth, who had arrived in Mojave 2 years earlier, running from an abusive husband. "Mrs. Turner saved my life," Elizabeth said simply. "She saw past my shame and fear to the person I could become. She gave me work, friendship, and respect when I had nothing. She told me her own story about being judged and rejected, about finding love despite scandal. She showed me that our past does not determine our future, that we can always start again. That lesson changed everything for me." Mrs. Turner was proof that understanding and love are stronger than judgment and scandal. Her legacy is not just her family or her ranch, but the countless lives she touched with her compassion and her refusal to condemn others for their struggles. Margaret was buried next to David on a hillside overlooking the ranch they had built together. Their headstone, chosen by their children, reads simply, "David and Margaret Turner, partners in life, partners in love. They proved that understanding is stronger than judgment and love conquers all." The Running T Ranch continued to prosper under Daniel's management and eventually passed to his children and grandchildren. The house remained in the Turner family, generations living in the home David and Margaret had filled with love. Family stories were passed down, especially the tale of how their grandparents met, how the town judged Margaret for being divorced, and how David married her anyway, building one of the great love stories of their time. The story became a legend in Mojave, teaching new generations about the power of looking past society's labels, about giving people second chances, about choosing love over judgment. Young couples courting would ride out to the Turner Ranch, standing by the headstone and promising each other the same kind of partnership David and Margaret had shared. And on quiet evenings, when the sun set behind the mountains and painted the desert sky in shades of gold and pink, people swore they could see two figures standing together on the hill, holding hands and looking out over the ranch that had been the foundation of their love. Whether it was truly their spirits or just the imagination of romantics, it served as a reminder that some loves are so strong, so true, that they transcend time itself. The town that had once judged her had long since forgotten the scandal. But the love story endured, passed down through generations as proof that understanding, compassion, and genuine love could overcome any obstacle. That a divorce was not the end of a woman's story, but could be the beginning of something even more beautiful. That the courage to trust again after betrayal could lead to the greatest happiness. And that sometimes the most unlikely partnerships become the strongest foundations for extraordinary lives. Margaret Keller, who became Margaret Turner, had arrived in Mojave carrying the weight of scandal and rejection. She left a legacy of love, family, community service, and proof that redemption and happiness are always possible for those brave enough to reach for them. Her story reminded everyone who heard it that we are defined not by our worst moments or our failures, but by how we rise from them, by the love we give and receive, by the lives we touch with our compassion and understanding. It was a story of second chances, of looking past society's judgments to see the truth underneath, of building something beautiful from broken pieces. It was a story of the Wild West, where the landscape was harsh but hearts could be generous, where new beginnings were always possible, where love could bloom in the most unlikely circumstances. Most of all, it was the story of two people who chose each other despite every obstacle, who built a partnership based on respect and genuine affection, who proved that understanding is indeed stronger than judgment, and that true love, once found, can weather any storm and create ripples that extend far beyond a single lifetime. The town judged her for being divorced. The understanding rancher married her anyway. And together, they created something far more powerful than scandal or gossip could ever touch. A legacy of love that would endure for generations, inspiring others to choose compassion over judgment, understanding over condemnation, and love over fear. That was the true gift David and Margaret Turner gave to the world, and it proved to be the most precious inheritance of all.